Welcome to Danske UNI. I'm going to do a session here on allyship and why it's important and take you through the 5 stages of inclusion. Let's start in a different place, and more specifically with the issue of left-handedness and why you could be against being left-handed. So first of all, it's unnatural and abnormal because it's only like 10 to 15% of the population that are left-handed. Secondly, the Bible presents the right hand as the hand of strength. Thirdly, you don't have to be a lefty, right? You could just use your right hand. Fourthly, children raised by lefties are, more prone to experiment with their hands and might become confused dexterity-wise. So we really need to think of the children and protect right-handedness because if they see people using their left hand, they might start doing the same. Now, I hope all of these arguments sounded absurd to you in this context. These are all arguments used against homosexuality, flipped into anti-left-handedness, if that's even a thing. And I use it to illustrate how we can get a new perspective on things if we substitute one thing for another. This technique is commonly referred to as a flip test. Who am I? My name is Michael Olinger. I've worked in Danske Bank for 7 years now. I'm a founding member of the Rainbow Network in Lithuania, a community for LGBTQ+ employees and allies. And besides that, I'm involved in various diversity and inclusion trainings as a trainer. And I just wanted to make a big shout out to all the wonderful co-workers, both in the network and working with the D&I agenda, who've helped me reflect on this subject and put this session together. So you all know who you are. So why do I want to talk about allyship? Well, for 3 main reasons. The first one is too many people live their life in fear of judgment, right? Meaning that they tell themselves, I don't know whom I can trust. I don't know how people will react to me. Secondly, because of microaggression, which are these derogatory comments, sometimes disguised as inappropriate humor, which can be really tiring to constantly listen to or have to stand up to. And finally, because of normativity, meaning that people who are within a certain norm don't realize that people that are outside of that norm constantly have to explain themselves. So this is a privilege that most people are not even aware of having if they're within a norm group. So how do I want to discuss this? Well, I developed this model, which I call the 5 stages of inclusion. And they go like this: opposition, conformity, neutrality, acceptance, and allyship. I'm going to go through each stage, and then I'm going to talk about what is in it, which emotions are usually connected with it, and what type of betterment could we have if we find ourselves on this stage. And what I'd like you to do is then reflect on what stage do you relate to? What do you find yourself on various issues? And how do you then think you could use some of this information to improve? So let's get to it. The first stage is opposition. And this is where people actively seek to discriminate and divide. So it's full of a very wide range of bigots: racists, chauvinists, fascists, homophobes, anti-Semitism, and so on. So it's a place of intolerance. And once people believe that, women shouldn't have voting rights, and once people believe that it was okay to segregate on the basis of skin color, and today somebody might believe that it's okay to discriminate based on other factors, what is interesting to notice here that these things change over time. So some of the feelings that we see in this stage of opposition is, well, inwards, you might feel that you're threatened, right? Because others might affect you, or you might feel fear that, somebody might do something to me, or stress because others are not like me. Then that will project outwards as, for example, disgust or anger or shaming or exclusion. So what can you do to improve if you find yourself here? Well, there's many different ways. I'm going to recount just 2. And the first is quite simple: meet and talk to the people you're in opposition to. Because it's very easy to hate and dehumanize an idea, whereas it's an entirely different thing to hate a person that you're breaking bread with. So, besides that, read and try to sincerely understand, especially people that have different opinions than yourself. I found this, which is a really interesting read that I recommend. It's called the Weingart Institute Report, and it goes in and it has 20 plus theological PhD scholars counter-arguing the current Catholic teachings on the ethics of same-sex relations. I'm not going to go through all the details, but it basically states out both the biological argument and the biblical argument and debunks those because they're based on misunderstandings and mistranslations of the Bible. So what I take with me from this report is that you're no more responsible for your sexual orientation as a non-heterosexual that you are as a heterosexual, and that same-sex relations can be as giving and blessed as any other relationship because there's more to partnership than just procreation, right? We probably all know this. It can be pleasure, love, comfort, celebration, friendship, companionship. Let's move on to the second stage. This is what I've called conformity, and this is where kids are, right? They observe the world around them, and then they copy the behaviors to blend in. And I believe that no child is born to hate, but every child is born to want to fit in because we're social animals. So children especially, but adults too, copy the behavior of their surroundings. So if they're surrounded by lots of opposers, they'll copy those behaviors to be part of their in-group, right? This is what we call conformity, illustrated by this chameleon. Then what are the feelings here? Well, the feelings at this stage is often, am I good enough, right? Do I fit in? Will other people accept me? And you get this attempt to fit in, even though it might not be who you really are. So how can we improve on this stage? Well, reflect on your own opinion, right? Why do I have this opinion? Where did I pick it up? And ask yourself, if you discard whatever everybody has told you previously, what do you then choose to guide you? Our differences or our similarities? Stage 3, which I've called neutrality. So previously I mentioned opposition, which is what I called intolerance, right? Now, neutrality is then what could be called tolerance, but tolerance is then the lowest form of non-opposition, because it's the equivalent of me inviting you over for dinner. And then I learned that you have a food allergy or you're vegetarian, and then I go like, I don't want to hear about that, right? Don't tell me those things. You know, sit down, eat whatever you want. I wouldn't do that because that would be weird. So the feelings in this stage is this don't ask, don't tell, some sort of indifference or ignorance because I prefer to live in my own little bubble, right? What happens with you is your issue, what happens with me is my issue. So how do we improve if we find ourselves here? Well, I would say by acting, because ask yourself if neutrality and indifference is sufficient in your world, right? What is the society you want to be part of? So with regards to racism, for example, I can recommend this read where the author puts up this interesting phrase of, you know, is it sufficient to declare yourself as a non-racist if that's what I would consider this neutrality stage to be, if you can be an anti-racist, right? So I'll leave you with this thought on this stage. A wise person once said that the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good people to do nothing. So sometimes, I guess, neutrality might not suffice. The fourth stage is what I call acceptance. It's fairly straightforward. I accept you, I expect you to accept me. It's like our bubbles connect. So if you're differently abled than me, for example, that's why you have a parking spot closer to the entrance. And I'm fine with that because that makes sense. The feelings then are, everybody's okay, everybody can be themselves, I embrace our differences, but I don't necessarily do anything actively about it, which then leads me to the improvement points here. Because, consider if you could be a counterweight to, for example, oppressors, or have discussions with conformists to lean towards acceptance. Because often what happens at this stage is what I call, and in literature is called the bystander effect. So we have people that wanna, if you ask them, they say, they hold belief that they would intervene if they saw something. But three things might happen. The first one is what I refer to as diffusion of responsibility, right? You're standing in a group or you're sitting in a meeting, and then somebody does something where you have a feeling that, somebody should do something, but since there are other people there, then you're thinking somebody else should do something. Because of the second point, we are under what's called this conformity bias, so we don't really want to stick out. We have a fear of public judgment or retaliation by sticking out of the crowd. And finally, there's this idea of pluralistic ignorance, right? So because nobody else is helping the situation, then maybe it's not an actual emergency, and then we avert our eyes and look away. So the easy hack to avoid this issue of the bystander effect is to be like the child from The Emperor's New Clothes, which just asked out loud. He's not wearing any clothes, right? And if you don't want to do that directly to the crowd, then you can just turn to the person next to you and say, hey, is what's going on here okay? And then you explain your feeling. And if you both look at each other and say, no, I don't think this is okay, then you'll find strength in that. And if enough people do that, then the crowd will eventually turn. So, the final stage is what I've called allyship. And an ally is then basically a person who takes action to further inclusion in society, in whatever aspect of inclusion you might want to do that in. So it's somebody who sees minoritized groups of people that are struggling and decides to help out, decides to lift them up. The interesting thing about allyship is it's not something you can proclaim, right? It can only be awarded to you by the people you actually help out. So the feelings here are those of inclusiveness, celebration, unity, pride, support. Can you improve on this stage? I definitely think you can, and here are 3 ideas of what you could work with. The first one is you need to be aware of what's called moral licensing, because once you establish a self-perception that I'm one of the good people and I support the discriminated, for example, then it can trigger this psychological mechanism that leads you to unconscious discriminatory behaviors. And the thing with allyship is it's not a one and done, right? You don't get a diploma that you hang on your wall. It's a daily effort, right? You have to stand up for those in need of it, and you need to reach out a helping hand to those that might be at a different stage of their inclusion journey. The second point then is lenience and forgiveness, especially towards oppressors, right? Because for me, it's always better to meet people with understanding than with spite, right? So you have a different opinion than me, and I'm trying to understand that. Because there's a very fine line between moving from being oppressed to becoming an oppressor. So engage with others rather than alienating them. And then the third improvement point is what I call avoid judgmental superiority. Because I don't think you're superior, neither morally or humanely. You're in a different place in your journey. And then remember, minoritized people, they're not looking for a savior. Right? They're looking for a friend, looking for a helping hand or an ally. So, how do we then foster inclusion on a daily basis? I have 5 ideas here as well. The first one is lift others up by advocating. And this is as simple as giving people a voice. Figure out what it is you can do to present those that might not be able to present themselves. And then when you engage with underrepresented people, then believe their experiences, right? ask them, so how do you think some of these things can improve? Because it's very easy as part of a norm group to immediately jump into your rational self and start counter-arguing and say, no, I don't think that's not the way I see the world. So truly listen to people's experiences. And then thirdly, call out inappropriate behavior, right? Microaggressions have an impact. So be that kid from the new clothes, turn to the person next to you and say, hey, is this okay? Fourthly, recognize that there might be systematic inequalities and privileges, right? And then use that to help amplify some of the underrepresented voices out there. And my personal experience with this is that understanding and recognizing your own privilege can be really daunting, because you have to have uncomfortable conversations with others, but also with yourself, right? You need to understand that some of the systematic and societal issues which might have played in your favor are there, and then try to use your privilege to amplify those that do not have that privilege. Finally, maybe most importantly, listen, truly listen, and then support and self-reflect on what is being said, because learning and growth happens when we are challenged, right? So follow an array of voices and then cross-examine yourself, your beliefs, and your biases. So that was the model that I built, the 5 stages of inclusion. And I don't know where you are on your inclusion journey, but I hope you'll be aware of it yourself. If you're asking yourself the question, when are we done, which is what I did, then my conclusion is, well, when this talk is no longer necessary, right? When questioning the narrative, when being in opposition of some of these things is as weird as when I started chastising people for using their left hand, then we'll be done. So why do we try to strive better, to do better where I work? Well, because it's hard to be an outsider. It's hard having to grown up being shamed or being part of the out group. It's hard to work in environments of aggression. And by all means, we're not perfect in DanskeBank, but we're determined to improve. And one of the ways we try to do that is to have these open networks that people can join. So if you ever decide to come and work with us, you'll know that you'll be free to be you, your whole you, also at work, not just at home, even if you're a lefty. Here are some of the books that I used to put this session together. Thank you very much for listening, and have a nice day.